You can try to defund him. You can try to impeach him. You can try to bring a judicial complaint against him. But Chief Judge of the D.C. District Courts and all things grand jury there, Jeb Boesberg, is not going anywhere. In fact, he's issuing new orders to try to slow down, if not stop, the lawlessness and defiance of the Department of Justice, especially as it handles trying to indict political targets of Donald Trump. And on the heels of multiple grand juries thumbing their nose at Jeanine Pirro, the political hack who's the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, them refusing to indict these political targets, including 6 members of Congress, the judge, the chief judge, the administrator, stepped forward and issued a new order. And that new order has to do with when grand juries don't return an indictment, when they decide to reject the prosecutors and stand fast to protect the innocent and not indict. We've seen it now with the 6 members of Congress led by 2 senators who were not indicted by a grand jury. And on the heels of that and other attempts to indict political foes of Donald Trump, we have this new order. It is pithy. It is beautiful in its simplicity. But what it now requires is that the Department of Justice audit itself, fess up on itself, and tell a magistrate judge when a grand jury does not indict based on their actions. It used to be if you don't get an indictment, everybody sort of goes home. You get an indictment, it's front page news. I mean, depending upon the target. So Boesberg's order has to do with grand jury, original grand jury criminal investigations, where there's no criminal complaint or criminal information being used by the prosecutor to start the criminal case. There's 2 ways to start a criminal case. A prosecutor can issue an information or a complaint. Then he can get subpoenas and search warrants, and he can get arrest warrants and all of that, but he's got to replace it eventually with an indictment, or you go right to an indictment. That's called a grand jury original investigation, a GJO. And here Boesberg is saying, when there is a GJO and they don't return an indictment, you are to report that to the magistrate judge. I'm Michael Popok. You're on the MeidasTouch Network and Legal AF. Now is the time to support independent journalism, independent commentary. Hit the subscribe button here and, of course, over on Legal AF YouTube channel. Here's what the judge reported, and then I'm going to give you the background of how we got here with Chief Judge Boesberg. He said several recent matters have raised the question of whether notice should be provided to the duty magistrate judge when a grand jury fails to concur in an indictment in a grand jury original investigation. In sealed memoranda submitted to the court, the government has presented its views, and here's what he's going to rule. This court has reviewed current practices relating to the return of indictments and notification of instances in which a grand jury has declined to indict. This court finds that notification should be provided to the duty magistrate judge, the magistrate judge on duty, whenever a grand jury fails to concur in an indictment, regardless of whether the defendant has already been charged. Why does he want to do that? It's a self-policing mechanism. It requires the Department of Justice to ultimately confess on itself and say they have yet another example of a grand jury rejecting their indictment. Now, Jeanine Pirro's getting upset. You can see it. I watch her now at her unhinged press conferences, and I don't know if I'm watching Cecily Strong from Saturday Night Live doing her caricature of Jeanine Pirro, the one with the wine bottle, or it's really Jeanine Pirro. So when she was asked by a reporter, I think even a Fox reporter, about what do you make of all the times the grand jury in D.C. is rejecting your indictments, she went off unhinged. Here's a clip.
Why are grand juries so skeptical of the cases that your office has been bringing?
Oh, cut it out. Do you know how many convictions we've got? Cut it out. You're in one lane. We have cleaned up this city. Yeah, historic? Really? I'll tell you what's historic. What's historic is that I prosecute everything other than 10% of the cases, where the United States attorney before me didn't prosecute 67% of the cases. That's what's historic. I'm willing to take a not guilty. I'm willing to take a no true bill, because I'll take all the crimes and put them in. Thank you.
And this, of course, Judge Boesberg is doing a number of things by issuing this order. He's recognizing the power of the grand jury. He's respecting their anonymity and protecting them, but he also wants the public to ultimately know, or at least have a record of, how many times indictments have not been returned by grand juries. It is an unusual circumstance until the Trump DOJ took over. We've had circumstances where a grand jury against New York Attorney General Letitia James not only refused to indict, but they wanted to publicly announce that they refused to indict. Quite odd. It was so odd the Department of Justice didn't want to be embarrassed with that and asked the judge in Norfolk, Virginia, to have it sealed so the public wouldn't know. The judge says, I don't know why the grand jury is not returning an indictment for mortgage fraud here. I can only suspect, but I'm not going to seal them. I'm not going to let the public not know about what just happened. And so this sort of builds on that. Judge Boesberg has been a bane to the existence of Donald Trump since he was a criminal defendant. And Judge Boesberg took over from Beryl Howell as the chief judge and was responsible for the grand jury process in criminal cases against Donald Trump. He's the one that made the ruling about Mike Pence having to testify before the grand jury against Donald Trump. He had to consider whether attorney-client privilege would be stripped away from Donald Trump's lawyers. He was responsible for search warrants and subpoenas at the latter half of the prosecution. So let's just put it this way. When Donald Trump came back to office, Judge Boesberg was at the top of his hit list. And we've seen it. Now, wouldn't you know it, the cosmic gods have a sense of humor. And just 2 or 3 months after the new term started for President Trump, the major case of 200 Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act being sent to the torture prisons of El Salvador without due process landed on the bench of Judge Boesberg. And he made a series of rulings that were violated about grounding those planes and giving those men due process. They're being represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, which you know is here with us on Legal AF. When all that got violated and continued to be violated, Judge Boesberg brought criminal contempt proceedings against the Trump administration, including what he found probable cause that there was criminal contempt of his orders. You might be wondering, what happened to that? Well, a couple of appellate panels dominated by Trump appointees blocked, for now, those proceedings. But you know that Donald Trump hates Judge Boesberg. If you didn't know it, here's a social media set of postings from just this past Sunday from Donald Trump against Judge Boesberg, particularly. He is exactly what judges should not be, Trump says about Boesberg. Boesberg would do better to focus on justice and fairness and not his own and the Democrats' political agenda, which has become legendary. I mean, he writes like less than a middle schooler, Trump. To preserve the integrity of the judiciary, Boesberg should be removed from all cases pertaining to us and suffer serious disciplinary action, as should numerous other corrupt judges that our country has had to endure. What Boesberg has done on the too late Powell case, that's the chair of the Federal Reserve, and many others, has little to do with the law and everything to do with politics. There's no proof of that. They've tried to defund him. They've tried to impeach him. They've tried to bring judicial complaints against him, and they've all failed. He's not going anywhere either. Just like Jay Powell is not intimidated by Donald Trump's attacks, neither is Judge Boesberg. He has the courage of his conviction. He has the lifetime appointment. And he has his belief as a constitutionalist in protecting the U.S. Constitution, no matter how deranged and depraved the occupant of the White House may be. So this order came as no surprise to me. It is a novel and brilliant way to start cataloging all the ways that the U.S. Attorney's Office is being abused, its independence being compromised by Donald Trump. And if he doesn't do it there, as we know, Judge Boesberg's not shy about stepping into the middle of a criminal prosecution, determining that the prosecution is in bad faith, and that the subpoenas obtained by a grand jury on no evidence of criminal wrongdoing by Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, that those should be quashed. Now, Trump doesn't like that. So in the last 24 hours, the Department of Justice, rather than taking the loss, dropping the criminal case against Jay Powell, and getting their Federal Reserve pick confirmed, because Tom Tillis will have no other objection. No, they're going to continue with the prosecution, even though it's been rejected. They should take the loss, if you know what I'm trying to say here. So they have now filed a new motion to reconsider with Judge Boesberg, telling him he got the standard wrong and he shouldn't interfere and intervene, and if not, they're going to take an appeal. He's going to reject that. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm pretty well confident that Judge Boesberg is not going to find that any of this was compelling, and they're going to have to take it up to the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, the Fed Court of Appeals, and from there, depending upon the results, maybe the United States Supreme Court will follow it all right here on Legal AF and on the MeidasTouch Network. So take a moment and hit the free subscribe button. But if you think this is the last story I'm going to tell about Chief Judge Jeb Boesberg being in the right, you've come to the wrong channel. Until my next report, this is Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.